intellectuelle. C'est un moment d'échange et d'inspiration qu'est notre conférence de ce soir. Je souhaite... Do you want, to have the translation? Mustafa, donnez la traduction à M. Jordan, s'il vous plaît. I think it's better. Je souhaite, de prime abord, exprimer ma réelle et sincère gratitude à notre partenaire d'Art America, le Centre culturel de l'ambassade américaine, pour cette belle collaboration dans le cadre du programme Manchout, Morocco. Nous sommes ravis de permettre à davantage d'experts, d'entrepreneurs et acteurs associatifs américains de partager leurs idées et expériences avec leurs homologues marocains. Merci à Madame la Consul Générale, Madame Jennifer, qui n'a pas pu être avec nous ce soir. Je remercie également l'équipe de d'Art America. Je remercie Steve, je remercie Laura et Jawed, qui nous ont fait le plaisir d'être avec nous ce soir. Mesdames et messieurs, ma joie est indicible de vous voir si nombreux réunis autour d'un thème si innovant et avant-gardiste, l'impression 3D et l'avenir de l'industrie. La joie que je ressens n'a d'échange que ma fierté d'appartenir à ce prestigieux centre de leadership pionnier au Maroc qu'est l'APD Maroc, et qui ne cesse de grandir année après année, fédérant encore et toujours plus de cadres dirigeants, d'experts et d'entrepreneurs de tout horizon. Le célèbre inventeur américain Charles Franklin Kettering, connu pour avoir conçu le démarreur électrique des voitures, disait, je cite, « Je m'intéresse à l'avenir car c'est là que je compte passer le reste de ma vie. » Je crois que c'est le cas pour chacun de vous, et c'est là le trait commun entre tous les événements de l'APD au niveau national comme à l'international. Depuis 14 ans maintenant, APD est toujours fidèle à sa patient statement, celle de contribuer au progrès de notre royaume à travers le progrès de ses cadres dirigeants. Année après année, et événement après événement, avec plus de 400 rencontres organisées à ce jour, nous avons reçu plus de 40 000 cadres dirigeants. APD œuvre et continuera à œuvrer avec enthousiasme pour concrétiser sa vision. C'est quoi notre vision? C'est celle de voir émerger, Inch'Allah, un Maroc avec une nouvelle génération de dirigeants de classe mondiale. Tel est notre espoir et notre vision aujourd'hui à l'APD. Oui, c'est à travers une nouvelle culture de leadership fondée principalement sur la poursuite continue de l'excellence, l'apprentissage à la vie ou le lifetime learning, la proactivité et l'inspiration que notre pays pourra renforcer et faire grandir toutes ces institutions. Et c'est ainsi que notre pays pourra fédérer toutes ses forces vives pour innover, réussir son émergence tant attendue et méritée sous la conduite éclairée de Sa Majesté le roi Mohamed VI. Oui, il s'agit bien d'un capital immatériel, tant négligé, et le besoin est plus que jamais pressant pour le valoriser et le faire grandir. À l'ère de l'économie du savoir et du monde de l'intelligence artificielle, toutes nos organisations ont besoin de 1980, avec les premiers procédés des prototypes rapides. Elle fut d'abord utilisée pour fabriquer des objets artisanaux, comme des bijoux, ou des produits personnalisés, comme des prothèses. Et aujourd'hui, avec le développement de l'impression, à l'aide des nouvelles matières, notamment le métal, et la baisse continue des coûts, l'étendue de son champ d'action est devenu sans limite. On fabrique des implants sur mesure, l'impression de la peau humaine artificielle et de médicaments personnalisés, construction de bâtiments ou encore de fusées aérospatiales. Entière, puisque ce soir, nous avons parmi nous notre invité de ce soir, un speaker qui nous a fait l'honneur et le plaisir d'être parmi nous ce soir. Et je vous présente donc Monsieur Jordan Noon, qui est un inventeur, un entrepreneur. Il a commencé sa carrière dans un prestigieux laboratoire de recherche aéronautique, HRL, propriété de Boeing et de General Motors en Californie, avant de rejoindre respectivement l'entreprise aérospatiale de Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin et puis celle d'Elon Musk, SpaceX. Vous avez par la suite confondé Relativity Space. Je pense que c'est la première et unique entreprise aérospatiale qui utilise exclusivement l'impression 3D pour la fabrication des fusées. Vous en assumez actuellement la direction technologique. Jordan est aussi classé parmi les 30 jeunes entrepreneurs de moins de 30 ans les plus prometteurs par Forbes, Business Insider et un autre magazine américain dont le nom m'échappe, je l'ai lu tout à l'heure, mais j'ai oublié. Avant de vous céder la parole, je souhaite remercier les partenaires, notamment le groupe Le Matin, remercier l'économiste, remercier la Royal Air Maroc. Je souhaite également, avant de donner la parole à Monsieur Jordan, vous faire part donc de nos prochaines rencontres du mois de juin et du mois de juillet. La semaine prochaine, nous aurons le plaisir de recevoir, je dirais, un vrai gourou du management que vous devez tous connaître, c'est Hervé Seriex, puisque c'est un auteur influent et expert de renom qui partagera avec nous son expérience sur 2 thèmes importants. Le premier, mobiliser l'intelligence collective. Il a même écrit plusieurs ouvrages sur cela. Cette conférence aura lieu à Casablanca et il fera également une autre conférence à Rabat où on parlera d'un sujet qui, dans mon sens, est d'une grande actualité, qui est l'intégration et l'insertion des jeunes, point clé et voie concrète du progrès. Donc tel sera le sujet qui sera abordé donc à Rabat la semaine prochaine. La semaine d'après, donc le 26 et le 27, nous aurons le privilège de recevoir un amiral de l'armée, l'amiral donc Lajoux, Olivier Lajoux, qui a été élu le meilleur directeur du capital humain et il nous parlera de sa vision sur l'art de diriger. Cette conférence aura lieu à Rabat sur le thème l'art de diriger. Il a écrit 2 ou 3 ouvrages sur cela, mais c'est vraiment une personnalité, c'est un amiral, et qui a pendant 30 ans effectivement été aux commandes de différentes responsabilités. C'est une personne remarquable. Il traitera également un autre sujet à Casablanca sur le thème du management de la richesse humaine, mais à l'ère du digital. Ça sera ça à Casablanca. Et puis, last but not least, nous organiserons notre prochaine édition d'entraînement au leadership à l'école militaire de Saint-Cyr. Ça, c'est un séminaire, bien sûr, extrêmement intéressant pour ceux qui veulent se dépasser, pour ceux qui veulent vraiment vivre une expérience unique. Donc, il y a encore, je crois, 3 places disponibles pour cet entraînement au leadership qui se passera donc sur le site de l'école militaire de Saint-Cyr. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous remercie infiniment. Avant de donner donc la parole à notre speaker de ce soir, je voudrais juste vous introduire, juste encore 3 minutes de votre temps, parce que c'est important, j'ai estimé que l'occasion était unique, de vous introduire une jeune dame qui s'appelle Rita Schreibi, qui est au Maroc et qui est coordinatrice donc d'un programme extrêmement intéressant. Et ce programme donnera la chance à une délégation d'entrepreneurs marocains pour être totalement pris en charge et d'aller assister et de représenter, je dirais, le Maroc à Las Vegas dans une foire, un event qui est extrêmement connu, qui s'appelle le Consumer Electronic Show, qui est un événement extrêmement important. Et c'est pour ça que nous l'avons invitée. Elle prendra 3 minutes juste pour dire que voilà, il y a une opportunité qui se présente pour que 20 entrepreneurs marocains seront totalement pris en charge et pour pouvoir participer donc à ce forum. Madame Schreibi, merci. Donc je vous donne la parole avant de démarrer notre conférence. Allez-y, merci beaucoup.
Bonsoir, je vous remercie pour cette opportunité. Je remercie l'APD et d'Américaine de nous avoir donné l'opportunité de vous parler du CES. Alors rapidement, pour la 3e année consécutive, le cluster d'électronique, mécatronique et mécanique, avec le cluster AMC, Aerospace Moroccan Cluster, avec le soutien du consulat des États-Unis et l'ambassade des États-Unis et le ministère de l'Industrie et du Commerce et de l'économie numérique, on lance la 3e participation du Maroc officielle au salon, le Consumer Electronic Show. Pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas, c'est le plus grand événement international de l'électronique. Il rassemble plus de 180 000 visiteurs, plus de 300 sessions de pitch, regroupe plus de 150 pays et beaucoup de représentants officiels. Et les secteurs qui sont représentés, comme le nom l'indique, c'est pour les consumers, les clients finaux. Et les secteurs d'activité varient de tout, de la santé, passant par 3D printing, to smart cities. Il couvre beaucoup de... Alors, rapidement, comment y participer? Nous cherchons, donc cet appel à projet est lancé pour des startups marocaines qui sont innovantes, qui n'ont pas encore lancé leurs produits et qui ont des solutions qui peuvent être appliquées au secteur de l'aérospace, qui ont un projet assez développé au stade d'un MVP, Minimum Valuable Products, et qui n'ont toujours pas lancé leurs produits. Comment y participer? Il suffit de soumissionner votre projet sur le site web cesmorocco.com. D'ailleurs, c'est notre landing page. Beaucoup plus d'informations, vous y trouverez. Et après, il faut soumissionner en parallèle sur notre plateforme et la plateforme du CES. Par la suite, nous allons sélectionner 20 qui vont être convoqués pour un pitching et pour finalement sélectionner 10 qui seront complètement pris en charge. Donc la prise en charge, elle comprend, il y aura un accompagnement, il y aura une prise en charge complète tout simplement. Il y a une préparation en amont, il y a l'accompagnement pour les visas, il y aura aussi une prise en charge totale pour les billets et l'hôtel et ce qui va suivre. Et vous allez profiter, et là-bas, vous allez profiter des réunions d'affaires et peut-être l'occasion de lever des fonds, de promouvoir et lancer votre produit dans une plateforme internationale. Je vous remercie pour votre temps et je serai à votre disposition par la suite pour répondre à toutes vos questions. Merci infiniment.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Jordan Noon. I'm co-founder and chief technology officer of a company called Relativity Space. I started Relativity about 3.5 years ago. It started as 2 of us, and we've since grown the company to just about 100. We're at 95 employees as of this week. Fully venture capital backed. We've raised $45 million in venture capital financing over a couple of financing rounds. We're doing another financing round right now. And we're the first and only company to 3D print an entire rocket. Part of that included making the world's largest metal 3D printers. I'll have some videos and pictures today of those in operation. We're going to start with some of my background. I've had a lot of questions this trip on my age, my background. I'm happy to share that with you. I'm 26 years old. When I started the company, I was 22. But we'll go through kind of my heritage before and during that. So we'll jump right in. I started at USC, which is the University of Southern California, in 2010 as an aerospace engineer. While there, I started working in a group called the Rocket Propulsion Lab, and they were trying to be the first student group to fly a rocket to space. We'll go into that in a little bit. You'll see one of the takeoff shots of those on the left here. Graduated from USC, went to SpaceX. I was working on their Crew Dragon Capsule, which is the man-rated version of their space capsule flying to the International Space Station. Spent 2 years doing that, including seeing my first foray into 3D printing and really seeing the success of metal 3D printing at a small scale. But got together with my co-founder and saw a future where not only the small parts were printed, but the entire product was printed. And we saw a slew of benefits there that I don't think even 3.5 years into this, a lot of other companies have started to tap into. And we'll go through detail on each of those steps right now. Here you see on the right, here's a takeoff shot of what we call Traveler 1. Traveler, the horse, is the USC mascot, so we named it after the horse. But this was a self-set competition when we started that group. Then to fly the world's first student-built and designed rocket to space. There was lots of challenges there. We really had no professor support, limited university support. It was really a student-driven project from the beginning. And so we weren't taking designs from someone or utilizing professor resources, really scratch-built. And there I started in 2010 as a freshman. I actually met my eventual Relativity co-founder in that lab around that time. And I took over that lab as a junior. And under my leadership, we got the first FAA clearance to fly to space. So I'm the youngest individual in the world to get clearance to fly that high. It was about 150 kilometers above ground level. And that was with the goal of flying that rocket above 100 kilometers. I spent about 3 years negotiating with the US Federal Aviation Administration and Bureau of Land Management on jurisdiction between the two of them, and getting 2 government agencies to get along has still continued through my entire career at this point. Just for size, you can see the rocket in the launch tower in the middle there. That was about the size of the group, so 50 people. And again, this was very, very early on. I started in that group at 17 years old, oversaw the first flight at 20, and then graduated at 21 there. But that was part of my what is now still a very short career, but started very early with the leadership skills, with some of the government relations talent, and even getting more attention from the university for more lab space, more equipment, and more funding. Here's a quick preview of all the projects there. I just showed you one of many, but about a dozen flights while we were there, 2 space shot attempts while there, so trying to beat the 100-kilometer altitude number. Both were unsuccessful. Then the group actually successfully flew earlier this year for the first time. It was their 4th attempt on that design. I still mentored that group in between as well. But went there to SpaceX. Then out of Los Angeles, many of you, I imagine, are familiar with SpaceX. They're in the news enough. But just a quick summary of them. They're essentially the first company to really kick off the commercial space race, very much starting to battle some of the incumbents like United Launch Alliance and some of the other companies around the world that have really dominated the launch market for the last couple decades. They've done a variety of milestones, whether it's the first commercially fueled or commercial liquid rocket to orbit, first company to launch a private spacecraft to the International Space Station, first company to land and reuse a rocket. I actually have some videos of that here just for context as well. Here's their rocket that they're mostly flying now, the Falcon 9. This was a launch, I think, a year or 2 ago. And then just for scale, but the significant part here is what they do with reusing and landing the first stage. So the first stage is the section underneath the black section in the middle. It normally lands in the ocean, breaks apart, never gets used again. But what they started doing is landing and reusing those boosters. And this is one of the major trends in aerospace right now. You'll see that first stage dropping. It goes about 100 kilometers in altitude and then drops off while the rest of the rocket goes to orbit with the payload. But you'll see it falling, and again, everyone before in history, and this was the first landing back in 2015, so it was actually right as I left SpaceX, they finally landed one of these. But you can see it lighting its engine. It's actually flying backwards through its own exhaust, which is a challenge for quite a few reasons. And you'll see that coming down. I'll get the mouse out of here. But they come down pretty fast. It's a fun thing they do. You'll see the landing legs unfold. Those are the little specks around the base, and then just drop right on the pad there. And the idea is to reuse these very quickly. Then in about 30 days or so of refurbishment, and then you're not throwing it away. And kind of the analogy used there is you'd be throwing away a plane after one flight, right? And it's probably actually debatable which is more expensive on these or planes. I think the planes are actually quite a bit more. But again, that very much drives launch cost, and that very much has bottlenecked a lot of industries that rely on space access, then whether it's telecommunications, imaging, or others. That was one of SpaceX's projects. The one that I mostly worked on was their Dragon capsule. Then this is a capsule meant to refuel and resupply the International Space Station. You can see here that capsule actually attached to the space station and flying over the planet. And that's the Canada arm there that's actually grabbing it and then getting ready to install that in order to unload everything. This capsule first flew in 2010, I believe. So they're actually through quite a few versions of the cargo capsule. The part I worked on was the crew capsule, and that's getting seats in there, man rating it, and getting the fault tolerance on it enough that you can fly people. And you can actually see the vehicle that I worked on. This is it docking to the space station earlier this year. This was back in March. This one, rather than being grabbed by the arm, you can see the thrusters are firing. Those are those bright specks around the capsule. And one of these cameras is on the capsule itself, one is on the space station, and you'll see them mate together. So this one flew without people on it. The next one will be flying with people most likely end of this year or beginning of next year. But all that set the stage for me starting my own company. I started Relativity again back in 2015, so 3.5 years old at this point. And myself and my co-founder, we met at USC. We were both in that rocket propulsion lab together. I went to SpaceX, he went to Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' space company up in Seattle, Washington. And we got together to build the world's largest metal 3D printer and to make rockets in it. And that was the premise at the beginning. There was a lot of thought put into that, more than just that one-liner, because there was a lot to prove even out over the next couple years. But on the right-hand side here, you can see our first large-scale printer. My co-founder, Tim, is in there for scale. And so these are about, I'm trying to track the mouse down. It's okay. These are about 20-foot tall for scale, limited by ceiling height. On what we can do, we put a lot of intentionality into these to make sure that they could scale to different diameters, different heights. This one can print up to about 3-meter diameter and 5-meter tall. And again, that height limit is limited by ceiling height. We have a lot of newer printers which can go taller, and our next generation printers will be online by end of the year and be about double what you see here in height capability. A lot of the direction we went, and I'll have more information on this in the later section, was to lower lead time and iteration speed on products. And people have done a lot to prototype single pieces at a time on a product, but never really pushed an entire product into 3D printing, and we feel there's some very strong benefits if you manufacture an entire product this way. As a company, we have 3 locations. There are 3 primary locations. We have our headquarters in Los Angeles. That's the design and manufacturing headquarters. In southern Mississippi, so in the middle there, That is where we have our engine testing site. So all of the rocket engines, all of the vehicle level tests are performed there. And then our launch site is at Cape Canaveral. It's a LC-16, which is an old Titan II launch pad there, used at times for the Apollo program as well for some of the lunar engine testing, and adopted that from the Air Force back in February of this year. As a company, we raised $45 million in funding to date, all private venture backing. Started with a combination of Mark Cuban, who owns the Dallas Mavericks, if you're into the NBA, and a Silicon Valley incubator called Y Combinator. Then they've done companies like Dropbox, Airbnb, Reddit, so a variety of really successful Silicon Valley companies. Have gone through there. Our Series A was done by Social Capital, and then Series B by Playground Global as well. Here's a short video I'll play. The video is actually pretty long. You can find it online, but I'll play a short section of it. I'm talking during it.
The world's largest metal 3D printer, entirely built and designed in house. The core of it includes 3 robot arms, one of which is doing printing, and the other 2 are doing post-processing. This is a 6-degree freedom industrial robot arm, so it can move anywhere within about a 14-foot radius of its center. Right now, the biggest parts we can make are 9-foot diameter and about 15 feet tall, and our printers are only getting bigger over time. We aim to go from print to launch pad in less than 60 days.
So that's the part I really enjoy, is the time lapse there. So that's about 2 weeks of printing. So it's about a day per second of video. I wouldn't make you guys wait 2 weeks. It's a little slow there. But that's really the core of what we saw when we started the company, was transitioning all of the traditional manufacturing of these metal parts to printing, and this is just one example of that. And there's a ton of benefits we see. I have a section where we'll deep dive into that, but stuff like this the world really hasn't seen before, especially for really, really high quality parts. What you saw, the detail of the head there, a lot of what that included was a sensor array that is used to monitor the prints. As you monitor it, we do closed loop control and machine learning on the process in order to not only control it live, but have the printer learn how to control it better on future iterations. As a company, we're at 95 people right now. Here's, I think, about when we were 60 or so. So this was kind of towards the end of last year. We've doubled already, or close to doubled already this year. We should hit about 150 employees end of this year, and then expect to be about 300 next year. And at the end of the day, we sell rockets, so we sell the actual launch service. Here's a rendering of our Terran 1 rocket flying from Cape Canaveral. Then 1,250 kilograms to low Earth orbit, servicing telecoms and imaging as our primary customers. We've announced 3 customers to date. We have Telesat, who's a Canadian telecoms provider, MuSpace, who's a Thailand telecoms provider, and then Spaceflight Industries, who's a small satellite, essentially a brokerage, and they help aggregate small payloads onto the bigger rockets. Here's a picture of us firing our 3D printed engine. These are printed in 3 pieces, liquid oxygen and liquid methane fueled. That 3 pieces really represents a lot of our vision of reducing part count. So we print these in 9 days in 3 parts. Traditionally, the lead time for a lot of the traditional manufacturing for these can be up to a year for some of the parts, and those are castings, brazings, a lot of manufacturing processes that really stack up on lead time and also remove all of the flexibility and iteration. So again, when I say print in 9 days, you can print a new design in 9 days, same speed as to make the current one, and that really lets us move much, much faster than anyone else in the industry. Here's the tank that was in the time lapse for scale. There's myself and my co-founder Tim in the machine. This tank was created back, I think, in November or so. And again, this is part of the rocket. This is part of the rocket that goes to orbit with the satellite, so not the part that would come back down to Earth. So this represents about 10% of the height of the total vehicle. And some of the stuff upcoming for us, first flight's expected beginning of 2021. So really ramping up towards that as we grow. First customer launch in Q2 of 2021. And then really stemming off what we think will be the first autonomous aerospace factory. And when we talk about aerospace, we think that's limited, or not limited just to rocketry. We think that if we can print a rocket, you can print other products. Then we do get that question a lot, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through some of the more detailed stuff on the company strategy. This is a combination of 3D printing, autonomous assembly of the rest of the parts, and we feel, even though automation has not had a big penetration within aerospace due to the complexity of the structures, complexity of what's being manufactured, that if you 3D print, lower the part count sufficiently, you actually really lower the barrier to entry to automate the rest of the production. This is a middle breakpoint here. So any questions so far? I know there was a lot really that I went through there. Yes. I don't know if it was out of order to do the Q&A right now, but surprised. Yeah.
Just kidding. So a quick question about the video that you showed earlier about the successful landing of the rocket. It's quite funny for me because I saw the previous attempts. There were 3 or 4, I think.
There's a lot that they released. There was a lot of development to get to the point that they could land.
So I'm talking about the attempts. Because I remember saw in a video on YouTube. And what I remember the most is Elon Musk crying because he knew it was the last attempt. If he didn't succeed, he was going to let go of the project.
Yeah.
So it's not a question, but I just want you to talk more about the failures that led to the success. Because it's inspiring to Moroccan startups. Thank you.
Yeah, SpaceX and their story is really interesting because they were really at the forefront of commercial space before commercial space really existed. So there are a lot of forces against them at the time. Then there still even are forces against them as they try to really step into some of the really established markets, whether it's serving the U.S. defense community or some of the more expensive payloads where they're trying to compete with companies that have very, very established trenches as far as how they've been operating for the last couple decades. But that's also why they've been very innovative, is they're very much having to fight their way into that. And what you see as far as landing rockets and lowering the cost through that is a prime example of that innovation when you have really strong competition. And other companies are starting to jump onto that. To your specific question on the failures, they flew Falcon 1, which is their first rocket. Then 4 times before they were successful. The 4th flight was the first one, and that one was, they had days of money left. And I can't speak too much on SpaceX's behalf on the details, but lots of that is public. The first 3 flights, I think they had very strong lessons learned, and it was a different problem each time. They were flying from Kwajalein Island, which is in the deep South Pacific, which has its own unique challenges. I've talked to a lot of people who have been, or who were down there. That was, I was still in high school then at that point, so it was quite a while ago that all that was happening. But no, it was a tremendous effort of all of them there, and they achieved that launch with surprisingly few people at the company. Elon's been pretty good about keeping SpaceX very small. Then, and it's a very impressive success story, especially in the face of having 3 failures. Then, and they barely had the time and money to get the 4th one off.
There's a quite funny video about that, the 3 failures, because in every time, one of the times the rocket successfully landed, but it crashed at the last moment.
Yeah, I was there for a lot of the landing attempts, and they since released a video called "How Not to Land a Rocket." Then, and it's actually pretty funny to watch in retrospect. At the time, some of them were pretty terrifying. Then things you didn't know a rocket could do, but that's learning. for it, and I recommend anyone who wants to see bloopers of rockets, landing on things and blowing up, to watch that. We'll jump into the rest of the detail here, but really want to talk about the future of manufacturing and how we view that, and how as a company we've kind of jumped in and started disrupting the entire value chain going into launch vehicles. And less about me. There was enough about me. Then, so to talk about a couple themes and how we feel we fit in here. Some of this, and especially if any of you are in the related industries I talk about, definitely excited to talk after this as well on how you think about it. But from our perspective, space is evolving. So historically, and I actually, in driving around Morocco in the last couple of days, it seems almost every single house or apartment has a satellite TV dish on it. Those historically have pointed at satellites very far away, so in the tens of thousands of kilometers, or what you call geosynchronous orbit. And those satellites are very expensive. There's a lot of kind of established trenches around regulations on what wavelengths they can use and what frequencies they can use to communicate. And those are very expensive. They can be in the billions of US dollars to fly one of those satellites, and that's generally why there's been so few companies operating in the geo satellite space. As electronics have gotten smaller, as launch capability has gone up, there's actually been a desire to make satellites smaller, bring them down to what's called low Earth orbit, or closer to where the International Space Station is, a couple hundred kilometers up, and then establish huge networks of them, and really have a distributed network architecture. But there's lots of challenges there. There's a lot in the miniaturization of the electronics. There's a lot in the inter-satellite communication links that goes into developing those. And then there's also developing the launch capability to support those kinds of what are called constellations. And these big networks are that constellation around the planet of up to a couple of thousand satellites at once. We are trying to fit into that market where we can provide a very quick turnaround, very low cost launch opportunity for these satellite operators. And the reason that they want that quick response time is that these satellites are moving with respect to the planet. Then when you think about these very far away satellites and why those direct TV dishes don't have to move in order to track the satellite, is that to someone observing on the planet, these satellites aren't moving. They're actually rotating at the same rate the planet is. And that's easy from certain perspectives. But again, as you bring these satellites down, make them smaller, now you have these moving satellites. And the challenge with those is that if one of them goes down, you have an issue with it, now you have a roaming blackout on the planet, where everyone on the planet is at one point or another affected by this telecoms outage. And if you were a telecoms company and every one of your customers had an hour of the day where they had no service, randomly, then you probably would have, a really bad day. So they're looking for a very quick turnaround response where you can go from beginning of manufacturing to flying one of these in a short period of time. And traditionally, it's taken years to spool up a rocket between the contract side, getting through the entire manufacturing supply chain, and then getting that rocket to the pad and flying it. As you compress that down, you get new opportunities where not only can you service these constellations, but for us as a launch company, people may actually pay more in order to get that expedited service. And we're again fitting into that, and that's really the space's evolving side. I hinted a little bit at kind of how we're fitting into that: time, cost, reliability, and flexibility. I think all of them were addressed a little bit in the prior part of this, other than flexibility. And the way we see flexibility fitting in is that these satellite constellations can actually change their product design faster than the launch companies and the rocket companies can change their rockets. So as they modify their designs and really try to iterate on their electronics, then they may try to increase their performance, but then rapidly outgrow what rockets can service those constellations. And we've had success securing customers that other smaller launchers have not because of that flexibility. They're looking for partners who can change their design as the satellite operators change their design. And if you're operating in a world where you can't change your design in a flexible manner, that very much is showing that perhaps you work today, but you won't work for them in a year or two. And that lack of a long-term relationship has really, really driven the market towards us. Our market, as far as the satellite opportunity, $25 billion US dollars for low and mid-Earth orbits, as far as what we can service with our current rocket families. And again, our goals is faster production time, fewer parts, a simple supply chain, and a payload size that actually services the market as it evolves. And the areas we tackle as a company, we have 3D printed rocket engines. We have our own large-scale printing that is our own IP. That's the large-scale printers you saw today. There's a lot we do on a design tool side in order to support the 3D printing and design for 3D printing. We make our own in-house flight electronics. We have a full avionics team doing all of that development. We have our own automation team handling all of the factory robotics side of things. And then we actually do our own metal alloy development for 3D printing. So really wrapping all of that together as, I'd say, the only company to do the product and the printer design together. What we're doing is really disrupting 60 years of aerospace manufacturing. I'd say aerospace manufacturing, even for a company like SpaceX, there hasn't been much innovation in there. It's really getting to the end goal and the end product as soon as possible without really strategically thinking about how that factory evolves for the next generation of product, the next generation of vehicle. For us, we're going for a toolless factory, where you don't have fixed molds, fixed bending equipment, fixed casting equipment. You just start with a 3D printer, and once that printer is developed, you can make a variety of objects and very much make a lightweight factory supporting a huge variety of parts. The end goal is to get our manufacturing time down to 60 days and our iteration speed to just 6 months. Just an example of the supply chain simplicity. This is one of many examples of how we drive down cost at the company, is very much driving down the operational complexity of the entire company and the operational complexity there. So we have two kinds of raw goods going into our factory: raw metal powder, raw metal wire. Those go into the two types of printers we utilize, the off-the-shelf ones and the in-house ones, robotic assembly, and then through our various sites between the factory, test site, and launch site. There's some other materials like the electronics, that we don't do with printing. It's not 100%, but very much targeting as much of that vehicle from as few materials as possible. Then, because even adding a third material in there, you think about sourcing the buyers for that, all the terms and conditions. It really starts ramping up as you increase the complexity there. 100 times fewer parts. I think our engines are a great example of this. Traditional engines of the configuration we showed there have up to 3,000 parts on them. It's a very complex interior. I unfortunately can't show you. We do those in 3 parts right now. So really dramatic reduction. We're starting to achieve that at the larger scale as we go towards the larger scale prints you saw in the video here. And again, that's things like once you start integrating in different components into one print, you remove all of the work orders, all the quality assurance steps where you're writing instructions for someone to verify other work being done. You have less on the supply chain. You're not ordering bolts. You're not tracking all the tooling in order to install the bolts. There's just a huge amount of overhead that compounds as that part count goes up. And then also on the data side, and there's some themes I even heard about this week on Industry 4.0, I think the vernacular for it, recently, where you want data from everything. And one of the advantages in the printing process is that you already have that data by default. And every single part of the vehicle you're collecting data on as you print it, you're able to combine that together and correlate it in ways where traditional manufacturing doesn't necessarily cater to. And there's a lot of effort in that Industry 4.0 movement to introduce data collection into all of the traditional manufacturing steps, where for us, we have that data collection by default in our one process. And an overall better way to design, build, and fly rockets. Other people build in 12 months, iterate in 48 months, and that's true even for very fast-moving companies like SpaceX. Then for us, build in 2 months and iterate in less than 6. And to wrap that up, we do believe everything that flies will be 3D printed within the next 20 years. Then if you think maybe 50 years in the future, I think 3D printing will be much faster. You'll have the quality assurance, and that was really the question we asked when we started the company was, if you think 50 years in the future, everything will be printed. Then, so thinking backwards from that, what needs to happen as far as on a control side, a material side, on the actual infrastructure to support that. Then, and we were able to show that that printer could exist today with what has been significant capital raise and significant development effort, but really started to execute on that vision and making that fully 3D printed future happen. But that's it. Thank you. Yes.
Really, thanks. Merci l'APD d'avoir organisé cet événement, and thanks Jordan for having accepted this invitation. So he said, Mr. Noon, good afternoon. I want to make the moon. Take me too soon. So my question is, how easy now to go to the moon? After this, that's not the really problem, but your idea of really doing the rocket through the 3D printing, would you extend your industry to other industries apart the aerospace?
No, it's a great question, and to talk first on the moon, and I didn't mention it in here. Our long-term vision of a company, or for the company, is to 3D print the first rocket from Mars. And that's really getting these printers off planet, supporting civilization off planet, and rather than sending all the traditional manufacturing equipment, a mill, a lathe, and everything on a rocket to another planet to support manufacturing there, we see a future where you send a 3D printer, make that equipment, make a habitat, make a fuel depot, make a car, all of the resources needed. And from my perspective, to see a self-sustaining civilization in my lifetime, I think in order to see a self-sustaining civilization in my lifetime, I think we need to send equipment like that. And that's what actually keeps me inspired to keep the company moving, is to get to that future. I think in my lifetime, it will definitely see people on other planets. We'll see the beginning of habitats and a long-term presence, but in order to see it self-sustaining, then on that self-sustaining civilization side, which is, I think, key to really thinking about it in a long-term manner and how it affects. Are we back? Okay. I may have hit the button. Sorry. But no, to get back into that, 3D printing, self-sustaining civilization then. To your question on printing in other areas, I definitely think it's possible. I don't know if the tech is ready for it just yet. And the reason I say that is on manufacturing speed. So one of the reasons why we're applying the 3D printing to rockets and then aerospace, the entirety of aerospace next, is the fact that rockets are very lightweight and aerospace products are very lightweight. And that's actually a value alignment between the 3D printing and aerospace products. Traditionally, as you optimize a structure for manufacture, or for weight, let's say weight and performance, you increase the manufacturing time because you're taking away more material, you have more machine time, more processing time. So you're actually driving up cost by increasing performance. For us in 3D printing in general, as you lightweight a structure, you're actually adding less material to it to manufacture it. So it drives down cost and drives down manufacturing time to optimize something. And that creates a wonderful value alignment where now you're incentivized financially to optimize your structure. And that's a really unique proposition that doesn't happen in traditional manufacturing. The reason I say that, though, is that printing can be slow, and there are weak points to the printing approach. Great for a super optimized structure, but would you print at this point a car frame, or some other piece of machinery, or something in like oil and gas? Then where it doesn't matter what the weight is, I'd say in specific cases yes, but manufacturing an entire product, no. Not yet. As printing gets faster and more applicable to those areas due to the weight, or perhaps if someone takes an approach where rather than a car engine that is very heavy because of the heat sink capability of it, they realize they can print it and do a very lightweight version that's, let's say, water-cooled, because printing and introducing cooling channels is a better proposition, then you actually are incentivized to make this 3D printed car very high performance. But not until that point where you start to transition other industries to the point where they start adopting the benefits of the printing rather than poking at some of the weak points.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you think about recyclable items for your rocket?
As far as using recycled materials? There's actually a good amount of reuse of the powders used in printing and the material. It's one of the key areas the industry is really driving towards, is how to not only use the material for additive, but there's a lot of excess. There's a lot of excess powder or material that doesn't get used, and there's companies evaluating that. Even the aluminums we use, we do our big printed tanks out of a variety of aluminum alloys. The contents in there, they're not necessarily always raw. A lot of them can be processed out of recycled goods. And one of the questions we do get sometimes is on environmental impact of printing. And it's something on a similar value alignment side to what I said with lowering manufacturing time, lowering cost because you're using less material. And that actually trickles through the entire value chain, where rather than someone somewhere mining all this material, turning it into an ingot, forming it, getting into a machine shop, cutting all the material out and everything that supports that, you actually are using significantly less material. One of the phrases often used is buy to fly ratio, where it's how much material are you bringing into your factory compared to what is going out as a finished product. And that can be in double digits, 10 or 20 times for certain products. For 3D printing, you really try to drive that down to hopefully close to 1-to-1, that everything you bring into the factory turns into a finished product. And that has a huge environmental impact as that trickles into the entire supply chain.
Hello. Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation. My question is, what I understand throughout your presentation is that you help mankind to escape from Earth. Is that right? So
we aren't sending people, not yet.
Nonetheless, when something is getting simpler, I'm thinking about going to space. When something is getting simpler, risks evolve as long as with this thing. My question is, do you study on risks linked to the fact that the more we're going to space, the more we're going to take risks about man's security and man's life?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and first, we're not sending people. I have worked on manned spaceflight projects before, and they get very complicated, and sometimes a little, sometimes even too much complexity can drive risk as well, because there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of degrees of freedom in a system, and it's really hard to analyze. Then, to your original question of getting people away from the planet, I do want to counter that a little bit, that I think there's a lot of short-term uses of the technology, especially the customers we enable, whether it's connectivity, data analytics through imaging, that are extremely useful for the planet as far as really trying to cater towards services from space. And again, whether it's these constellations trying to solve the last mile problem on connectivity by having these constellations, or imaging for analytics where you're looking for greenhouse gas releases, or you're looking at forest changes or river flow changes from space, and certain sensing or just perspectives that are only available from space are immensely valuable today. Then so I'd say there's a lot of improvement to the planet and Earth itself, even if some of these technologies can be used off planet. And that was a lot of the approach we took in designing the approach for the company. Was, we have a very lofty long-term goal. We don't start with that because people tend to think we're more loony than they need to. But we actually have that short-term application and that trajectory to get there, as far as developing this printing tech to solve current problems with the current market, and then transforming that into getting a printer to the moon or to get a printer to Mars. And so to your question on risk then and sending people, different groups have different perspectives on risk for sending people. Then, like NASA has taken an ever so conservative risk stance, where any sort of risk to an astronaut is unacceptable. Then that drives a lot of complexity, and from my perspective, again, having worked on manned spaceflight, as you drive more and more complexity into a product, there's a lot of unknowns, or so many people get involved, there's so many degrees of freedom, communication channels, that it actually is increasing in risk due to that level of complexity. And I generally think a simpler system, something with lower parts, less coupling between all the components on it, is actually safer because you can understand it. You may just trick yourself into thinking that a more more complex system due to all of the redundancy is safer, but I'd say it's much, much harder to actually understand what you're doing. That answers it.
Hello, everybody. So thank you, APD, for organizing this conference, and thank you very much, Mr. Jordan, for sharing with us your successful experience. So my question is around the mentality change to move from traditional manufacturing process to 3D printing or to the advanced reality, because we want to move to this kind of technology in Morocco, even for big industries like aerospace, automotive companies, or in traditional manufacturing process. So, so what kind of solution and steps to go to change firstly the mentality, because going to this technology so involve like a lot of investment from research and development, from qualifying resources, from investment also from equipment, capital, etc. technology. So how to convince a dedicated organization to start to think about this and make it like realistic?
That's a great question, and clearly I came from a company that was doing 3D printing at a smaller scale and decided that there wasn't a way to turn that company into one that 3D printed everything. And there's a couple of reasons there as far as how I think about it, and I hopefully have a yes answer to how I think that's possible at the end of this, but it is tricky, and that's often because companies will take 3D printing and do, they'll look at a design for a product, they'll find one piece on that is applicable to 3D printing, and they'll print it. And when you're printing just one piece at a time, especially transitioning a traditionally manufactured part, sheet metal part, whatever it is, machine part, to 3D printing, it generally is, for various reasons, it's more expensive if it's just this one part. Maybe it's not perfectly designed for printing because you're just taking this old design. And that may take all this post-processing to get it into a usable state. And then it's probably not perfect on a property side compared to what this original product wanted. Then if you take all of those, now this experiment was a failure. Then of introducing 3D printing, because you saw no benefits from it, then other than maybe on like lead time, as far as the benefits. And that approach will never cause a high amount of adoption and penetration within a company. Then, because they're generally for an established company, even one that I came from, then as you try a piece part at a time, you don't see this holistic benefit. All the stuff I talked about today on a global iteration speed increase, a global cost decrease. You maybe get a little bit of the fun factor from printing, but not a holistic company disruption. So when I think about how to do that, if I went back and tried to do that again, it's very much trying to sell the holistic benefit rather than the piece part. Where if you do 10% of the product printed, but not 1%, you actually start to see some of these more holistic benefits. But the one piece at a time approach doesn't work, I'd say, for convincing a pre-established structure that a disruption is possible, because at one piece part at a time, you don't actually start to see benefit. You really have to start getting a quorum of parts redesigned and not only transitioned to 3D printing, but designed for 3D printing, designed for that lower part count, and perhaps even designed for extra functionality, then because of the capability of the printing. And so I'd propose something like that where, again, the relative delta of doing one part at a time is so insignificant it doesn't get attention. To your question on capital expenditure and costs, I'd say, again, don't look at just at one piece, but look at what it replaces. Because if you're replacing 10,000 square foot of factory with one printer, because you don't have to support a bunch of sheet metal operations, a bunch of traditional assembly, a bunch of QA space, a bunch of metrology in between for all those piece parts, you actually start dramatically reducing factory footprint. And that operational impact isn't generally calculated in when you just look at this one piece part at a time. That's probably the best I can provide.
Thank you for this inspiring presentation. I just wonder if the US military is one of your customers, and if you realize some military rockets?
We don't, let's see. We don't do any payloads right now other than imaging and telecommunications. So there is some direction for us to eventually go into some of those services, perhaps for the U.S. military or other organizations, perhaps more on like reconnaissance, surveillance. But we don't have any desire to do anything like explosive payloads or warheads would be the right word. We have no desire to turn what is very much a services supporting rocket into a missile. And there is some attention from groups like the U.S. military on things like very fast turnaround or spare parts from 3D printing, but none of that is anything that's active today with us.
Next question.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Mr. Noon for this fruitful presentation. You've talked about all the benefits of 3D printing in aerospace.
Mm-hmm.
In aerospace, my question is, what are the boundaries that limit the involvement of this industry?
Mm-hmm. No, there's definitely certain parts that can't be printed. Then for us, things that printing isn't ready for yet today, things like very high fatigue items, rotating components in the engine, and things like turbopump components. The technology is not ready yet to get sufficient properties to achieve those. We target about 95% of our vehicle printed by mass, and that last 5% are things that we try to design the systems around those parts not being flexible. So you would get that flexibility in other parts of the system, not these locked-in components, so that we still have that global flexibility. Things like soft goods, like plastics, some of that, the printing started generally with plastics, not necessarily for aerospace applications or like seals and valves yet, but some of that is getting there. And certain products, they really have to be designed and tuned for the printing. Then I'll say whether it's on a property side, a surface finish side, right? The printing generally results in rough surfaces for a variety of reasons. And again, if you look at the printing and you say, oh, we can't make this product with flow in it because it has a rough surface, then for us, we look at that system and can we design for extra pressure loss because of a rough surface? And that's how we answer those questions, is working with what can be viewed as the cons of printing rather than shutting the idea down because of it. And we've generally seen people in established companies or people who are very used to traditional manufacturing will find any of those areas to poke at and say, oh, the surface finish is rough, we can't ever do printing, and that's an art project. Then it goes in a museum, and that's not our perspective. It's very much, sure, we have a rough surface. It doesn't matter to our customers if our vehicle is lower performance because of these rough surfaces or lower fatigue life or higher friction in spots, if it's cheaper, quicker to iterate, and actually provides what they need.
Yes, please, here. Give me the opportunity again. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer, for the presentation. I have one question. It's about the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows that behind every industry there is a successful supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of technology do you use to make your companies more successful?
On the supply chain side, specifically? Yeah, we're fortunately still at a size that we don't have to be using like a full-up ERP system. Then we are working on it. It should be implemented by end of the year. Then, so a lot of that is getting ready for the first manufacturing, or the first flight vehicle manufacturing, which is starting in January. Then where we're getting those systems in place, and we'll see how it goes. Is that what you were asking on kind of ERP, enterprise resource planning? So manufacturing the raw material.
The entire chain.
Oh, so what goes in between? Sorry, I am not following. Mm-hmm. Oh, the logistics internally, then, of it. We put a lot of intentionality into the factory flow, and thankfully the factory flow is pretty simple coming from the printers. We have a lot of smaller parts coming from the powder bed printers. There's the larger parts coming from the big printers you saw the videos of. And we view that as kind of a node and backbone. So you have the backbone coming out of the big printers where you need the detail and the fine resolution of the smaller printers. You attach that on essentially through those smaller printed parts. Then you add the electronics and avionics to that, and that actually gets close to a finished vehicle. Rockets are, at the end of the day, it's a huge propellant tank and some engines and some electronics. It's actually a fairly simple, despite the part counts, right? It's a very kind of elegant product design. But that integration, as far as on a factory side, that's ongoing. We have 2 factories, one in Los Angeles and then a Mississippi one as well. I feel I'm not answering the core of your question, though. No, it's a great question. I don't want to say I'm surprised no one hasn't tried to replicate it, but I think for the established companies in the space, then, so both the incumbents for the last couple of decades and then what is the current generation of new space companies, a lot of them have their direction, and as I was talking about, it's actually really hard to transition an entire company on the supply chain side, on the factory design side, on the design philosophy side, right, to this. And that's really why we saw we had to start the company from scratch to embed that philosophy from the beginning and then build up all of the auxiliary verticals with that, whether it's supply chain, manufacturing, engineering, factory, infrastructure, things like that, in order to support that kind of flow. Then, and a good number of aerospace companies print a number of parts, but no one's ever designed the entire product for printing, and clearly for us, we had to make the world's largest metal 3D printers in order to achieve that. And that on an IP side it's all internal, and also then even building the company to include that manufacturing development as well, because building and designing a rocket is even already a pretty tough task, and even raising enough capital to do that is a tough task. For us as well, to have a 3D printing design office and developing those printers and the factories to even support those printers is a challenge as well, to get those 2 sides of the company to integrate together. But very, very much the only company that's doing the printer design and the product design together, and we think that'll result in a very elegant solution where if we need a different amount of performance for the printer or from the printer to solve a specific problem, we actually can very easily solve that. And we did not see us partnering with any of the other large-scale printing vendors that are out there, because they're trying to service a generalized market. They wouldn't necessarily tune a specific thing for manufacturing, let's say, in a specific aerospace problem or product with a problem.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is your challenge now? What is your next project for the next 20 years?
Next 20 years? Oh, no, that's a great question. No, I clearly... Yeah, we're still working towards getting to first flight of our rocket, so want to keep expectations tame there, and that's the primary focus, is getting the company to that point where we're flying Terran 1, the vehicle I showed successfully, and servicing those markets that we talked about. But as far as after that, there's expansion into bigger rockets as far as servicing more payloads. Once you're a bigger rocket, you can be reusable. Then, so we get the question a lot on why not reuse rockets today, and it's generally that we're too small right now, but we do see a future where the rockets do tend to get bigger, and that is true for almost all rocket companies. And then there's two more areas. One is off-planet printing, getting one of these printers, let's say, to the moon. There's a lot of attention in the U.S. and the current NASA administration to get people back to the moon. We're asking the question of why send people when you can send a printer then, and that printer would be able to help support future manned exploration. So it's a more leveraged effort. Sending people is cool, it's really exciting. I'm here as part of the 50th anniversary of Apollo. I'm not going yet. I have more work to do, and then I'll go. But no, getting that printer there, we feel, is how to think about a long-term vision and strategy for the moon, and more on services and utilities than just sending people. It was exciting sending people 50 years ago. Repeating that for the 50th anniversary with the Artemis program is exciting, but it doesn't necessarily have a long-term impact for what the moon is capable of. And then the last area would be other verticals. So we're pretty successfully tackling integrating in the fully printed approach with the commercial rocket launch side. But the question is, what do we do next for applications of the technology?
Again, 2 questions, 3 maximum.
So, in terms of fundraising,
Mm-hmm.
so you've raised $45 million first. Obviously, your company is getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I have 2 questions in this. So, if I am a venture capitalist, business agent, why shall I trust you to give you more money to invest? And upon what do you base your business model to forecast something for me that is not sure will be a success?
Mm-hmm.
First industrial commercialization will start by the end of this year or next year,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know whether it will be a success.
Right.
That's one question. And second question, as you are disrupting the market, how about apprehending the coming of the new challenges, maybe from China, from Russia,
Mm-hmm.
which are also some aerospace mastodons that
Right.
will emerge? So these 2 questions.
Yeah, no, those are both great questions. The first one, and hopefully this isn't too amusing of an answer, that venture capital is risky, right? As far as, I know venture capitalists should be going in thinking it's a guaranteed success, right? That's kind of the whole venture capital model. But no, so we do our fair share of financial modeling for this stuff. We have a pretty big finance team that includes people who have a VC background, so they very much know what documentation to present. As far as the factors that generally lead to the investor interest now, we've almost 100% successfully hit the milestones we've said we would. And from what I've heard from the venture capital community, even barely reaching what you said you were going to do is a success. Then, because so many companies just fall flat at post-investment. And we've done a really good job, and all of our investors from seed round all the way to the current Series B have continued their pro rata. Then and continued to invest even after seeing the nitty-gritty internal details of the company, which is just a strong sign of confidence. On the customer side, we've landed companies like Telesat, who are in the top 5 telecoms providers in the world, who have not chosen any of the other smaller launchers at our capability. And that's a lot when you talk to them, and a lot of why that partnership matured was that flexibility and iteration capability. They very much like our technology approach, where other players in the market, perhaps more established or already flying their rockets, don't actually have a capability that interests the customers. And that's almost like a slap in the face at the end of the day. If you're flying your rocket and no one wants to buy it, then it's a tough spot to be in. On a team side, we've attracted a lot of top talent from other companies. When we spoke about kind of the Falcon 1 experience at SpaceX, we have the majority of the leadership of that team having joined us now, and they left other companies like Virgin Orbit and a variety of the companies around in the industry because of our approach. When you think about these other companies, they've made a lot of decisions that make it very tough to change their rockets. They're locked in certain designs. A 747 is only so big on what it can carry. And those lessons have led people to come over to us because they're very much seeing, after having lived through it a couple times, that we chose the right approach. And that, I think, is a big sign of confidence. I think the tech's pretty cool. Like it's really exciting for investors as well. It's not your standard SaaS company. Which is really exciting for people. So hopefully that captures most of what makes us stand out. Also on the government partnership side, that'll kind of tail into the second question. We have about $260 million of government infrastructure that's been handed over to us between the launch pad, the Mississippi factory, the Mississippi test site. We have a really strong relationship with the US government, not necessarily in contracts for delivered products, but in order to obtain underutilized government infrastructure. Then when we started those government partnerships when we were still 2 people, we're now at 95, and the government has seen us grow kind of from baby size to where we are now, and that has given us a really good foothold in order to enable further opportunities with them, because they're so familiar with us and our approach, having seen us grow up since we were essentially kids. To the second question, on international competition, no, it's a good question. You mentioned Russia, and Russia's been pretty active historically. They're still the world leader in number of launches they've done. they've diminished a little bit in their standing the last couple years. They've had a good number of launch failures. And there hasn't been necessarily a lot of innovation from their products recently. There's been a transition from the larger players more towards Ariane and SpaceX, some of the other players in the market. So, and to add to that, Russia hasn't targeted the smaller launcher scale, which is where our ecosystem is. But who has targeted the smaller launcher ecosystem is China. And China has a lot of activity in the smaller launcher space. They're one of our main competitors in performance and cost than for what we can provide. And it's an ongoing conversation on, for us and some of the foreign, like state-sponsored competition, like what's going on in China, on how we continue to position ourselves versus them and a lot of the discounts they provide due to their relation with the Chinese government. And so it is an active conversation because they're essentially, I'd say, top in competition with the US for the future launch opportunities for these constellations.
Hi, good evening. I just want to go back to your business model and ask you one question. Are you focusing only on aerospace industry, or are you planning to, in the near future, to sell your expertise and your 3D printers maybe to other manufacturing industries?
It's a good question. We've to date only made printers for making in-house designed products. And as we explore these other verticals, whether it's other areas in aerospace or automotive or really any industry, one of the main questions we ask is, are we making piece parts as a contractor for someone else's product, or are we making the product? And when I talk about these holistic benefits when an entire product is redesigned for printing, we only really see a lot of that happening if the product is designed to be fully printed. And you don't see those benefits and that adoption if not. So again, the question is, can we get that to happen at someone else's, or within someone else's product design? Or as we saw on the rocket side, in order to get the product redesigned to really adopt the technology, that we would have to do that ourselves. So it's a product first piece part decision. As we go forward, we don't necessarily see ourselves selling the printers. We like to keep them.
Last question.
Well, first of all, congratulations. You are a success story.
Thank you.
And your age really is just, I consider it, it's a mystery, the way, doing this, this age. Really, congratulations.
Thank you.
So my first, question is, what will be your advice, to the Moroccan startups? How can they, approach this industry? And is it that easy for them, to do it? My second, it's not a question, but just want you to think, with me about this. How much aerospace industry has reduced human suffering? Thank you.
Okay. Start with the first one. Then, so I've had the fortunate opportunity to explore a couple cities the last couple days, and I've a couple more coming up tomorrow and through the weekend. So far I've made my way from Rabat to Tangier, and then I've been in Casablanca now since noon or so. From talking to a lot of the students, a lot of the entrepreneurs around Tangier, I had a wonderful opportunity at the Techno Park, then both last night and this morning with two sets of young entrepreneurs. And in talking to them, I really had to learn the ecosystem here in order to even answer this question. So again, this is a little bit off the cuff on what I'd recommend, but there's certain programs I've found through this exploration that seem very inspiring and very much trying to build an ecosystem of entrepreneurs and the services around supporting a young company, whether it's providing office space or support on seed financings. Then in my encouragement would be to very much try to figure out how to foster and support that ecosystem then and really create a strong network. I fortunately come from a background at Y Combinator, which very much has built that over the last almost 15 or 12 years now, where they have startup legal services, they have free discounts for cloud services for developers, right? They have office space area, they have people you can talk to on the highs and lows of being a founder, right? And that system exists there. I see the beginnings of it here. And I would recommend perhaps looking at some of those systems and how they built themselves up and really created a self-sustaining founder ecosystem to nurture that here. Because a lot of the conversation I had, and perhaps, I wouldn't say it's fear, but the idea people had in their heads was that in order to be successful, you have to leave Morocco. And that was something not exciting for me to hear, but I was seeing success stories, and I think everyone in this room, as well, would be an inspiration towards how to be successful within the country, and how to nurture that within the youth, whether it's hands-on programs, speaking events, or just helping provide services for companies that aren't big enough necessarily to either afford or support those. For the second question on human suffering, that's not an easy one. I think there's again, stuff like what we're trying to provide, and that's what I can talk about the most, where we're reducing the cost of launch, trying to provide services to these telecommunications or imaging companies, is invaluable. And things like that, GPS, there's a ton of services that have came from space capability, whether it's mapping or tracking resources, looking at environmental impact, looking at population movement, right? Trying to track that as well, and I think that's really, really invaluable. I had a conversation with someone the other day on the economic impact of GPS, which is something hard to kind of track down on a specific number, but they were saying that the cost of the entire GPS network coming out of the U.S. actually helps things like the trucking industry so much for just tracking vehicles. And the network savings within trucking and logistics companies by being able to track their trucks effectively pays for the entire fleet of satellites. And that's just one industry. So those kind of services I think are really invaluable and are some of the secondary effects of things like the launch market or satellite costs going down.
I promise is the last question.
Okay.
Just one question, very quick. I just tried to look at your financial statements for 2018. I think not disclosed under internet, but
correct.
Yeah, I do not
hope
find
so.
But what is your expectation for cash flow to become cash flow generative company for the investors?
We expect when we're flying 3 times a year to be cash flow positive, and that first year would be 2021. But until then, R&D is expensive, and venture capital has money. That's kind of the balance, but it takes a little bit to get there. Compared to the other launch companies and their manufacturing approaches and support, a lot of that equipment and their style does not really have a net positive approach until maybe double-digit launches per year. And to the question on, I'm not sure where the gentleman went, the question on why investors have looked at us and had attraction to our company, a lot of it's that we have realistic numbers on launches per year in order to become profitable. A lot of other companies have banked on, double-digit 20 to 50 times per year, which is really unheard of within the launch industry, and that's given a good confidence that our approach makes sense. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, to welcome you in APD. I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you.
And I hope we see you again in a couple of years here in Morocco.
I'd love to come back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Je vous invite pour un cocktail dînatoire et continuer le débat et l'échange avec M. Jordan.